The wedding was meant to look calm, respectable, and unquestionable. Inside a grand church in New York City, powerful men gathered with the belief that the future had already been decided. This was not a normal wedding. It was a public confirmation of control, designed to show unity and silence opposition without needing to say a single word. Every detail had been planned carefully. Seating arrangements reflected hierarchy. Security was subtle but strong. The timing of the ceremony itself carried meaning. This wedding was meant to signal that a new balance of power had been finalized, and that anyone outside this agreement no longer mattered. The family behind the wedding believed this moment would secure their dominance for years. It was meant to close doors, not open them. The alliance being formed inside the church was supposed to eliminate uncertainty and remove resistance quietly. From the outside, it appeared flawless. What made the situation dangerous was not what was happening inside the church, but who was missing from it. Harlem was not represented. That absence was intentional. It was a message that Harlem's influence was considered finished, or at least no longer important enough to acknowledge. The men involved believed Harlem's power had limits. They believed it could be ignored. That belief came from years of expansion and success that had gone largely unchallenged. Confidence had turned into assumption, and assumption had turned into carelessness. What they failed to consider was the mindset of Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy Johnson had survived long enough to understand how power truly behaved. He had seen alliances rise and fall, families grow strong and then weaken themselves through pride. He knew that moments of celebration often hid moments of vulnerability. The wedding represented something final to the Gambino leadership. To Bumpy, it represented opportunity, a moment when attention was focused in one place, a moment when confidence was high and caution was low. Inside the church, guests believed they were witnessing history being sealed. They believed the future was stable. What none of them realized was that the very event meant to lock power forever had already exposed how fragile that power was. The ceremony moved forward smoothly. There were no signs of trouble, no visible tension. Yet outside the church, a decision had already been made that would quietly change the meaning of everything happening inside. As the ceremony approached its most important moment, someone who was never invited was already on his way to rewrite the future. Bumpy Johnson did not respond to the wedding announcement with anger. He responded with patience. While others might have seen the ceremony as an insult, Bumpy saw it as confirmation. It confirmed that his opponents believed he was no longer a factor. That belief made them vulnerable. Bumpy had never relied on speed. He relied on time. Over the years, he had learned that violence solved short-term problems but created long-term ones. Attention brought pressure, and pressure destroyed stability. Silence, on the other hand, allowed control to grow quietly. For a long time, Harlem's strength had been built without spectacle. Information moved carefully. Relationships were maintained rather than rushed. Weak points were identified and stored away, not used immediately. Bumpy understood that knowledge gained value the longer it was held. When news of the wedding reached him, it fit perfectly into patterns he had already observed. The Gambino family was expanding with confidence that bordered on arrogance. Internal loyalty was being stretched. Side arrangements were increasing. Public unity was hiding private uncertainty. Bumpy understood something important about crime families. Their greatest fear was not attack. It was exposure. Not just legal exposure, but internal exposure. The moment members began questioning each other, the foundation weakened. He also understood the symbolism of weddings. These events were meant to represent trust and unity. Interrupting that symbolism did not require violence. It required doubt. If doubt entered the moment, it would follow everyone home. Bumpy did not plan to stop the ceremony openly. He planned to change what it meant. He prepared a single object, chosen for how ordinary it appeared. It would not demand attention. It would invite thought. The power of this object did not come from what it showed, but from what it suggested. It suggested preparation. It suggested knowledge. It suggested that the celebration inside the church was happening under watchful eyes. Timing mattered more than force. Appearing too early would be ignored. Appearing too late would be pointless. Bumpy waited until the moment when confidence was at its highest. As the ceremony began inside the church, Bumpy made his move, not with noise, not with threats, just with presence. The moment he stepped toward the church doors, the calm inside was about to turn into something far more dangerous. The ceremony was moving exactly as planned. The atmosphere inside the church felt controlled, calm, and confident. Every guest believed they were witnessing a moment that could not be challenged. This was how power liked to present itself: quiet, certain, and unquestioned. Then the doors opened. There was no announcement and no reaction at first. The sound was subtle, but the effect was immediate. Attention shifted without instruction. The presence entering the church did not need explanation. Those who recognized it understood that something irreversible had begun. Bumpy Johnson walked inside with steady control. His pace was slow, deliberate, and calm. He carried himself like someone who did not need permission to exist in that space. The confidence in his movement contrasted sharply with the confidence already seated inside the church. The room adjusted around him. Conversations stopped. Body language changed. What moments earlier felt stable now felt uncertain. Bumpy did not challenge anyone directly. He did not acknowledge hierarchy. His presence alone was enough to test it. For the family hosting the wedding, this moment created an impossible situation. Removing him would turn a symbolic event into open conflict. Ignoring him would suggest weakness. Allowing him to proceed meant accepting uncertainty. Silence became the only option that avoided immediate damage. Bumpy moved forward holding a small, neatly wrapped box. It looked respectful, almost ordinary. That appearance was intentional. An object that looked harmless forced observers to think rather than react. Fear grows fastest when it has no clear shape. As he walked down the aisle, the meaning of the ceremony began to shift. What had been planned as a public display of unity was quietly becoming a moment of exposure. Every guest now understood that the event was no longer fully controlled by those who planned it. Bumpy placed the box carefully near the front. The act was precise and unhurried. It carried no aggression and no apology. It was simply done. In that moment, the wedding stopped being a conclusion and became a question. The ceremony continued, but the feeling inside the room had changed. Confidence had been interrupted. Attention drifted from vows to possibilities. The future that once felt guaranteed now felt uncertain. Bumpy did not stay to watch reactions. His purpose was not to dominate the room, but to change it. That change had already happened. As the ceremony moved toward its end, the unopened gift quietly became the most powerful presence in the church. The box was small and unremarkable, yet it carried more weight than anything else in the room. It was not opened, and it did not need to be. Its power came from implication rather than action. Those who understood Bumpy Johnson understood that he never acted without preparation. The leadership behind the wedding recognized the danger immediately. The box suggested information, records, and awareness that could not be ignored. It implied that private actions had been seen and remembered. Whether everything inside was complete or not did not matter. The possibility alone was enough. The wedding was meant to represent unity. Instead, it introduced suspicion. Once suspicion entered the leadership, trust began to weaken. Every relationship became something to re-examine. Every decision felt exposed to risk. The brilliance of the move was restraint. Nothing was forced. No reaction was demanded. The consequences were delayed, which made them more destructive. Fear that unfolds slowly has more time to settle. The ceremony ended without disruption, but its purpose had collapsed. Guests left with questions they could not ask publicly. The celebration felt hollow, even if no one could explain why. For the family involved, the problem was no longer external pressure. It was internal uncertainty. Every member wondered what Bumpy knew and who might be affected. Silence became uncomfortable. Meetings became cautious. The gift ensured that nothing associated with the wedding would ever feel stable. It had transformed a moment of confidence into a long-term liability. Bumpy Johnson did not follow up. He did not explain. He did not threaten. His silence allowed fear to grow on its own. The family now had to deal with itself. What had been intended as a final step toward dominance became the starting point of doubt. In the days that followed, the real damage began to surface where no one outside could see it. The damage caused by the wedding did not appear in public. That was what made it so effective. In the days that followed, everything seemed normal from the outside. Business continued, meetings were held, money still moved, but inside the organization, behavior began to change. Confidence disappeared first. Decisions that once felt easy became difficult. Plans that would have been approved quickly were delayed, questioned, and sometimes abandoned. Leadership meetings grew longer and less productive. Every choice carried risk, and no one wanted to be responsible if something went wrong. The gift had created uncertainty, and uncertainty changed priorities. Members stopped focusing on growth and began focusing on protection. Personal safety became more important than collective success. That shift weakened the organization more than any outside attack could have. Internal reviews began quietly. Financial paths were rechecked. Relationships were examined. Loyalty was tested without being openly questioned. Each review produced more doubt than clarity. The absence of clear answers made the situation worse. What made the collapse difficult to control was the lack of a visible enemy. There was no public threat to respond to, no action to retaliate against. The pressure came from within. Every member wondered who might be exposed and what might be revealed next. As trust weakened, small mistakes increased, communication slowed, coordination suffered. Minor errors repeated themselves. These mistakes were not dramatic, but they attracted attention. Confidence had once protected the organization from scrutiny. Fear removed that protection. Outside pressure began to increase naturally. Law enforcement did not need new information. Instability made patterns easier to notice. The organization became predictable in ways it never had before. Throughout this period, Bumpy Johnson remained silent. That silence amplified the damage. Without confrontation, there was nothing to resolve. Without explanation, there was nothing to correct. The uncertainty stayed. What began as a symbolic interruption had become a structural problem. The organization was no longer moving forward together. It was managing itself out of fear. As doubt spread inside the family, another force began to benefit quietly from their hesitation. Harlem did not announce its return to power. It did not need to. Influence returned naturally as instability spread elsewhere. While others hesitated, Harlem stayed steady. That stability became attractive. Routes that had been pressured reopened. Relationships that had cooled were reactivated. Operations resumed without drawing attention. Nothing was rushed. Everything felt familiar again. The contrast was clear. While the Gambino family questioned itself, Harlem appeared calm. Calm creates confidence. Confidence creates influence. Others adjusted their alliances accordingly, not because of fear, but because of reliability. Bumpy's approach avoided visibility. He understood that drawing attention would invite pressure. Instead, Harlem positioned itself as predictable and steady. In uncertain environments, predictability becomes power. Territory shifted without confrontation. Control changed hands through neglect rather than force. Where the Gambino family hesitated, Harlem filled the gap quietly. This process took time. Months passed, then years. By the time the shift became obvious, reversing it would have required unity that no longer existed elsewhere. Bumpy did not expand aggressively. He allowed the situation to develop naturally. Time continued to work in his favor. Harlem did not dominate headlines. It did not need to. Its influence returned because others trusted it more. Yet the full impact of that wedding would not be understood until the long-term consequences became impossible to ignore. The true impact of the wedding did not reveal itself quickly, and that delay made the damage deeper. In the months and years that followed, the organization involved continued to exist, but it never operated with the same confidence again. What had once felt inevitable now felt fragile. Leadership decisions became defensive. Expansion plans were paused or canceled. New opportunities were approached with hesitation instead of ambition. The organization was no longer focused on growth. It was focused on avoiding risk. That shift quietly reshaped everything. Internal belief weakened first. Members stopped assuming stability and began preparing for uncertainty. Loyalty became conditional rather than automatic. Individuals focused more on protecting themselves than strengthening the group. That behavior slowly drained collective strength. The absence of a clear threat made recovery difficult. There was no single problem to fix, and no single enemy to confront. The pressure came from within. Every attempt to restore confidence highlighted how fragile it had become. Outside forces noticed the change. Instability creates patterns, and patterns attract attention. Small mistakes became more frequent. Communication gaps widen. Operations that once ran smoothly began showing signs of strain. These were not dramatic failures, but they added up. Time did not heal the damage. It reinforced it. The memory of the wedding lingered quietly, shaping decisions long after the moment passed. Leaders remembered how quickly certainty had disappeared, and that memory influenced every choice that followed. The organization continued, but its presence weakened. Others adjusted accordingly. Influence shifted not because of open defeat, but because confidence had drained away. Power that doubts itself cannot maintain control. The most lasting consequence was psychological. Once belief collapsed, it never fully returned. That loss changed how authority was perceived, both inside the organization and by those watching from the outside. What began as a single interruption had reshaped behavior permanently. Yet the meaning of that moment reached beyond long-term damage, revealing a deeper truth about how power actually works. The wedding was never truly about celebration. It was about certainty. And certainty is fragile when it depends on appearance rather than stability. The interruption exposed a misunderstanding that many powerful organizations make, believing power can be declared publicly and secured forever. Power does not survive through display alone. It survives through confidence, trust, and psychological balance. The wedding revealed that those elements were weaker than they appeared. Once that weakness became visible, everything built upon it began to shift. The gift box symbolized restraint rather than aggression. It proved that influence does not always come from force. Sometimes it comes from timing, preparation, and silence. Violence demands reaction. Uncertainty demands adjustment. The most effective part of the strategy was that nothing dramatic happened. No public collapse, no immediate consequence. The results unfolded naturally, driven by human behavior rather than confrontation. Fear spread quietly. Doubt settled in slowly. This lesson extended beyond that single moment. Organizations fail when internal belief breaks down. Once confidence disappears, every decision becomes defensive. Progress slows. Decline begins without announcement. The interrupted wedding became a warning remembered rather than discussed. It reminded leaders that confidence must be protected carefully, and that overconfidence invites exposure. Power exercised quietly lasts longer than power displayed openly. The moment endured not because of what happened publicly, but because of what changed privately. The real shift occurred after the guests left, after attention moved on, and after silence returned. What remained was a lasting reminder that the most powerful moves are often the least visible. That patience can defeat force, and that control, once shaken internally, rarely returns to its original form. Long after the church emptied and the city moved forward, the consequences of that quiet interruption continued to shape decisions made in silence.